Well, what's up, Detroit? Today I am joined by Mr. Adrian Miller. Adrian, how are you?
Doing well. Good to see you.
You as well. You as well. Once again, thanks for taking some time to talk with us and fill us in with your sweet event that's coming up and your book. But let's start with the book. Actually, before we start with the book, why don't you tell us a little bit about your background and what kind of brought you to this point?
Yeah, so I'm Adrian Miller, the soul food scholar. My tagline is dropping knowledge like hot biscuits.
Nice.
Yep, I was born and raised in Denver, Colorado, which immediately loses me all street cred on the subject of soul food and barbecue. But it's a great migration story. My parents, mom from Chattanooga, Tennessee, my dad's from Helena, Arkansas. They independently came to Denver in the 1960s and met in church.
Nice.
And then, as they say, the rest is history. And then I grew up in Denver, then went to Stanford University for undergrad, majored in international relations. Then I went to Georgetown Law School, practiced law for like 4 years, hated it. Got to the point where I was singing spirituals in my office.
What type of law was it?
It was employment law. It was commercial litigation and employment law.
Okay.
And it's bad because white people were joining in. And then I was going to open up a soul food restaurant, but then I got a chance to work in the Clinton White House. So I worked on something called the President's Initiative for One America.
Nice.
It was a racial reconciliation effort. And the wild and crazy idea behind that is that if we just talked to one another and listened, we'd realize that we have a lot more in common than what supposedly divides us.
Absolutely.
So then after doing that, I came back to Colorado, got in politics, but then I developed this side hustle on food writing.
Okay.
Which brings me to you today. So my day job right now is I'm the executive director of the Colorado Council of Churches. And then on the side, I write about African American food history.
Excellent. Wow. Those are two things that I'm very interested in. So that's great. So let's talk specifically about Black Smoke. What was like the inspiration behind that? And what does it mean to you, the book in general, if you was to summarize it?
Yeah, so the book is a love letter to African American barbecue cooks. And the whole idea here was, if you look at food media these days, when they talk about barbecue, they pretty much are just talking about white dudes.
Okay, yeah.
And I thought that was messed up because that did not square with my experience at all. Mm-hmm. And so I thought, I need to figure out a way to celebrate these cooks and to show how they made significant contributions to America's barbecue culture. Yes. But so when I was writing my soul food book, I thought I was going to have barbecue stuff in it. And then I thought, I am probably going to need to make this a separate book because there's just so much stuff that I found. I just thought it needed a separate treatment. Okay. So, I guess the most significant catalyst for it was I was watching the Food Network and there was a commercial for Paula Deen's Southern Barbecue.
Yeah, I'm familiar.
And so I thought, let me just watch that because I want to see what the leading trends are in barbecue, who's getting celebrated. Mm-hmm. And then after the end of 60 minutes later, after the credits are rolling, not one African American was featured.
That's amazing.
Yeah, on that show. And so I thought, well, this is crazy. How can that even happen in the year 2004? And then the other thing I thought is, maybe I got it twisted. Maybe it was Paula Deen's Scandinavian Barbecue, sponsored by Alabama White Sauce. So I started looking around, and it wasn't just Paula Deen's show. It was just almost every significant outlet for storytelling about barbecue either pushed Black people to the margins or left them out completely.
Tell us about, the book itself. Like, as for our audience who, if they have not read the back of the book or, the foreword or anything like that, like what would they get from this book?
So what I tried to do is, what I endeavored to do was to tell barbecue's history going back to the early days. So I wanted to look at what was the early history of barbecue, which is, pun intended, very hazy because, it's just not well documented.
Okay.
And so I just tried to look through the sources and I just wanted to see what was the African American role in this thing that so many people love. So I really wanted to see what were the earliest writings about barbecue. And what I argue is that it's Native American in its foundation. And then later colonizing Europeans and enslaved Africans come into the mix, and it puts us on the road to what we call Southern barbecue today.
Yeah.
So, not everybody agrees with me, because there are several people like, no, barbecue is universal. There's no pinpoint origin story except for when human beings started playing with fire and meat. You got some that say, no, it's just from Europe. And then, you have some people that say, no, it's African in origin, because so many Black people are involved, at least in the U.S., in its creation. And don't get me wrong, I wanted to prove definitively that barbecue was African in origin, so that I could just do like this and go Wakanda forever. But I'm a guy that's guided by facts. And if you just look at the early history, there's just no strong evidence that Africans were doing this and cooking that way. When I let me just back up and say, when I define barbecue, I'm talking about digging a trench, filling it with hardwood burning coals, letting those coals burn down, then creating some kind of, gridiron by, some kind of grill or something on that surface, and then cooking whole animals at the surface level.
Okay.
So I'm not talking about cooking a whole animal underground, because you see that in other cultures around the world.
Absolutely.
I'm not talking about cooking an animal above ground on a spit or anything, because you see that in cultures all around the world.
Absolutely.
It's really this surface level cooking that people started calling barbecue. And
let me ask you a question with that.
Yeah.
So with your experience with soul food, the origin of soul food, and now you're digging into the origin of barbecue. Has there been an intersection where they meet? And one of the things that I think about is, soul food, and correct me if I'm wrong, my understanding of soul food came from the slave days, when African Americans would receive the leftovers from their masters, and then that turned into the ham hocks and the chitlins, and so I guess if you could kind of talk a little bit about that, and if you saw an intersection between the two.
Yeah, so there is an intersection. And in terms of time and place, and so just to understand, we need to step back and just understand how food kind of operated in slavery for enslaved people. So most people are on very small farms or in cities. That's like 60% of where enslaved people were held in bondage. So in those and in those situations, you didn't have a large enslaved labor force. So you're talking about five or fewer enslaved people in those situations. So it didn't make sense to have a separate cooking and feeding system like you see on the large plantations. So in the small situations, the small scale situations, and enslaved and slaveholder are often eating out of the same pot.
Okay.
On the larger plantations, like what we see in Gone with the Wind and all that, there's where you had two separate systems. So typically enslaved people got up at dawn. They ate out of a trough filled with crumbled cornbread and buttermilk mixed together. They had to eat with their fingers or a seafood shell, because a utensil is a potential weapon. Then they would go work out in the fields, and then they would come back for the midday meal. So that same trough would be filled with seasonal vegetables, maybe some meat to season the vegetables. Then they would go back in the fields again, and then they would come back after sunset, and they would eat supper, which was leftovers usually from the midday meal. So that was pretty much how enslaved people ate during the week. On the large farms, plantations, then the work schedule ended around noon, and then enslaved people would have the rest of the weekend off. So that's when they would tend their gardens. If they weren't too tired during the week, they would do it after everything was over, but usually they were just tired and waited till the weekends. That's when they fished, hunted, foraged, did all kinds of things to supplement their diet. And then they did things like make fried chicken, cook barbecue, because they had more time, and those things are more labor intensive. So barbecue, fried chicken, a lot of the things that we think about as soul food are really special occasion food.
Interesting.
Of the South. So that's one point of overlap.
Okay.
So now the idea, which is a popular narrative, is this is the master's leftovers, the food they didn't want. That comes from the hog killing season tradition. So after the first frost, because I don't know if you've ever had a picnic in the South, man, the amount of flies are just dribbling.
Oh, I can imagine.
Yeah.
I've been to some restaurants and they make their way in too. So
yeah. So, well, there's an argument. I don't know if you heard the joke that, hey, if you go to a place and there aren't flies, then what do flies know?
You're right.
That's a signal that you might not want to.
That's a great point.
Right. So they wait till after the first frost in order to reduce the amount of spoilage. But then they would kill hundreds of hogs. And the idea was to kill them, process the meat, and this meat was then preserved so that it would get through the winter. So it was smoked, dried, salted, or pickled, whatever. And then there's a lot of meat that's created by that, but then you've got these ephemeral parts of the pig, like the intestines, the heart, internal organs and all this kind of stuff. And so those had to be consumed quickly because there was really no way to preserve them. And so often enslaved people got those portions, in chitlins being the most famous or infamous, depending on your perspective. And so they made delicacies out of that. Now, here's the thing. So that leads into that whole kind of leftovers part, but that's really only one aspect of the food that enslaved people got. And so the other thing is that white people were eating the same stuff. Okay. So I walked into this project thinking that things like chitlins and soul food was wholly creative for Black people. Right. But one of the biggest surprises I had is that if you look at what people actually ate, it's really more about place and class than it is race. Okay. Race keeps people from eating it together, but it's really about place. So another convergence points, though, is Sundays. After service, for those that did, not everybody went to church, but a lot of people did. Soul food and barbecue were served afterward as a way to build community. Because preachers were just like politicians. They're like, hey, if I have some good food after this, and I might get people to show up.
They're right.
They maybe be faking the funk and want to turn what I'm talking about, but they right. Show up. Right.
Well, and that tradition carries on today to an extent.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, savvy leaders know that they can use food to build community. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And then that's been the story, especially with politicians and preachers, for a long time. So you see this special occasion vibe that shows up in barbecue and in soul food. And then other than that, there's just a lot of variation in terms of the type of soul food eaten and the type of barbecue made. That really, it's really hyper local.
Interesting.
But I will say this: before the 20th century, barbecue was pretty much the same thing to everybody. It was cooking a whole animal, pig, a sheep, or if they did a cow, they would quarter it because it's just too big to turn over a cow.
Sure.
That's what barbecue was for everybody. Now, the side dishes may vary and stuff, but that's what barbecue was. It really isn't until the 20th century that we start to get all the regional traditions that we argue about today as if they've been around for thousands of years.
Okay. And during that time, prior to the more modernized version that we know of, was it still just special occasions?
Yeah, I mean, because it was so labor intensive, a slaveholder would not let enslaved people take any time away from getting that agricultural crop cultivated and harvested. So they did not want to take away any time from that. So yeah, it was really only when the work wasn't happening that people got to do these things. And then after emancipation, you still had the same incentive, right? Because you're a farmer, a sharecropper. Your incentive is to cultivate that land and everything. So people would just save that for the weekends and special occasions. And then you see a political tradition develop where, and again, those politicians, yes, they want to get votes, so they would have barbecue, and then religious leaders would do that. And the other reason why you wouldn't just have a barbecue kind of impromptu is when you kill a whole pig and cook it, that's a lot of food.
Oh, yes.
And so you need to have a lot of people around. Again, this is the idea of how it builds community.
So was the barbecue first, or was the soul food first, or?
Let's see, if we just based on what we see, I think barbecue came first.
Interesting. Okay.
Because what I argue is that soul food is really the fusing of West Africa, Western Europe, and the Americas in terms of ingredients, dishes, cooking traditions, and techniques. So that kind of develops over time. So, the earliest years of colonization, you see basically Europeans just eating whatever Native Americans could, because they were trying to grow their food from Europe, but they just couldn't do it. Like they couldn't get wheat in the early years. They couldn't get wheat to grow. And so, they were faced with starvation. And so they would eat what the Native Americans taught them to eat. and that's where we get barbecue coming up. And then actually, colonizing Europeans enslaved Native Americans first, and it was only when that didn't work that they turned to African slavery.
Right.
So, so again, this is not well documented, but it seems to me that Native Americans were doing something like barbecue for Europeans before enslaved Africans showed up. And then again, when colonizing Europeans and enslaved Africans get in the mix, it starts taking this early form of barbecue to something that we eventually call Southern Pit barbecue.
Okay.
Yeah.
Nice. Other than your own barbecue, where's the best barbecue you've had?
So, growing up in Denver, Kansas City had an outsized influence on me. Okay. So I'm a big Kansas City fan. So I really like Gates barbecue in Kansas City, and there's a local place called LC's, which the locals know about. It's not a place widely known outside of that. But then, some of the best I've had was in Houston. There's a place called Burns, which Anthony Bourdain went to on his show. Okay. There's another place called Ray's. Man, those are just really good.
They sound like that.
Yeah. North Carolina barbecue, there's a place called Grady's in Dudley, North Carolina. So it's outside of Raleigh. You have to be wanting to go to Dudley. It's not.
Okay. Any Detroit?
The soul food was more memorable. Because like Motor City soul food, beans and cornbread, sweet potato sensations, Steve's, even Baker Keyboard Lounge. I had a good meal there.
Yeah, me too.
So yeah, those places. So soul food really struck a chord with me.
So you share recipes in the book as well?
Yeah. Oh, one more thing. I just want to back up and say, there's one place I want to try. I really want to try the halal barbecue place. There's some Muslim brothers who are doing a barbecue, and so I really want to try that because I've had kosher barbecue in Brooklyn, New York, and it was quite good. So I would love to get some halal barbecue. I can't remember. I mean, maybe Halal Brothers, but I just can't remember it. So I have recipes in the book. I tried to get recipes that evoke themes in the book, both historical and contemporary. Because even when I do my book tours, people are like, "Oh, okay." They start asking me cooking questions.
Sure,
sure. Even though the history is compelling, they're interested in the cooking questions.
Excellent. So you're coming to town.
Yeah.
And we're going to be at the Zingerman's Roadhouse. All right. Excellent. Yeah. And so tell us about the event. Is September 12th? Is that correct?
Yeah, it's September 12th in the evening. And so this is about a new initiative that's being started.
What is the evening going to look like?
Yeah, so it's going to be a barbecue dinner to support something called the New Enterprise at Work link. So I think it's something that's helping entrepreneurs of color. And it's a great initiative, a collaboration with Zingerman's in order to support this. So I've been able to talk to a couple of people with the organization. So it's a good way to kind of connect with the community, especially those interested in incubating businesses and to get started. So we're going to have a multi-course meal. It's going to be a serious barbecue spread. And so at that, members of New Link will be there to talk about their work. Excellent. And I will talk about the history of barbecue. So it won't be like a super long lecture, but I'll just give nuggets here and there.
Okay.
Just to give some people a little context about barbecue history. We'll talk about how it started and how African Americans got so linked to this food tradition. It's going to be a great evening of just, it's going to be informative and entertaining, and then we're going to help a good cause.
Oh, that's going to be a great event. Now, hopefully I'll be able to attend. I think I'm going to be free and available, so I'm definitely going to try to come by. And what's a must-try dish?
So we're going to have some whole hog pate, Texas-style barbecued short ribs.
Okay.
Mo K-san, I don't know if you recognize him from TV, but we're going to have his Memphis-style chicken.
All right.
Mashed potato salad, smoked cabbage slaw, some Coolicles, some biscuits, and some banana pudding.
Oh man, I'm there. All that sounds great.
That's the spread.
That's one heck of a spread.
Yes. So all of those things are good. I guess out of all of that, I mean, you got to, I think the barbecue short ribs. I think you'll be
okay.
Yeah,
okay.
yeah.
Well, let me make a note of that. Awesome. And where can people find your book?
So if you go to soulfoodscholar.com, there's a shop page, and you can find all of my books there. So I wrote a book on the history of soul food, a book on the history of Black chefs in the White House, and then a book on barbecue, Black smoke. You can order a copy, and I will autograph it and send it to you. And I am so grateful that you get my book that I'll autograph it any way you want. So if you want me to say I couldn't have written the book without you, I can certainly do that.
Awesome. That sounds great. Well, I look forward to meeting you, outside of Zoom, September 12th. I look forward to reading more in the book. I actually, I've looked at some of the back and the insides and a couple of parts of it, so I can't wait to really dive into it.
Okay, yeah, I think you'll like it. I think readers will dig it, and it's been a real pleasure to celebrate these cooks and just kind of, rewrite the current narrative that's leaving us out.
Yes, that's so important, and I appreciate the work that you're doing. So I look forward to seeing you September 12th.
All right, sounds good. Thanks for having me on.
All right, sounds good. Thanks for being on.
All right.